Millionaire leaves pregnant wife for mistress, but she was hiding a secret that changes everything. In a quiet suburb of Charleston, the wealthy magnate James Blackwood seemed to have it all: a thriving business empire, a palatial home, and a beautiful wife named Caroline. Yet beneath the shimmering veneer of success lay a marriage teetering on the brink. In a single night, James shattered the illusion of their once perfect union when he confessed he was leaving Caroline for a stunning woman named Vanessa, his longtime mistress. Broken-hearted and blind-sided, Caroline braced herself for the fallout. Little did James know, however, that Vanessa was harboring a shocking secret, a hidden truth that would upend all their lives forever. Caroline Montgomery Blackwood was born into a modest family in Greenville, South Carolina. She was the daughter of a high school teacher and a retired nurse, both of whom instilled in her the values of compassion, integrity, and resilience. She carried these traits with her when she moved to Charleston in her early 20s, determined to make something of herself. That was when she first met James Blackwood, a man whose very presence could light up a room with sheer confidence. He was older, already wealthy from a series of real estate ventures that propelled him to local fame, and possessed a magnetic charm that drew Caroline in from the start. At the beginning of their relationship, Caroline found James's ambition intoxicating. He had a way of making the impossible seem easy, dreaming aloud of building an empire that would rival the biggest names in the country. In return, James found Caroline's warm spirit, an unwavering support, a welcome refuge from the cutthroat negotiations and corporate posturing he faced every day. They fit together like two puzzle pieces, one bold and visionary, the other empathetic and steadying. The synergy of their union was undeniable, and it didn't take long for them to marry in a lavish ceremony overlooking the harbor. Life after the wedding was a whirlwind of business deals and social galas. Caroline found herself the graceful hostess of James's many parties, forging connections with the city's elite. Yet beneath the glitter, she couldn't help but notice the toll that James's never-ending aspirations placed on their relationship. He traveled often. He came home later and later, or sometimes not at all. When Caroline confronted him, James would dismiss her concerns with a reassuring smile, telling her that every sacrifice was for their future. And for a while, that answer worked. Caroline trusted him, loved him enough to let her doubts remain unvoiced. Things began to shift when Caroline suspected James was becoming restless, his interest drifting. He started showing more signs of dissatisfaction at home, small criticisms, a certain impatience when she spoke about her day, a reluctance to talk about the future unless it involved business. Then there was his phone, which he guarded with an intensity that made Caroline's stomach churn with suspicion. Late-night texts, hushed phone calls, business trips extended for days without explanation, her mind buzzed with possibilities, each darker than the last. Caroline tried to talk to him, but each conversation ended in evasion. James would deflect with claims of new clients or last-minute negotiations that absolutely couldn't wait. He grew distant, almost cold, as if home life had lost its luster for him. In many ways, he was already gone before the confession, before the heartbreak, before the raw devastation that was about to unfold. Caroline never imagined that a few hours later, on a night that began like any other, James would walk through their ornate front doors, take her trembling hands in his, and utter those fateful words, "I'm leaving you." The initial shock left Caroline speechless. Her palms went clammy, her heart thundered against her ribs, and she felt an inexplicable cold creep into her bones. James's voice echoed in her ears, "I'm leaving you," but the words didn't quite sink in. She stared at him, searching for the gentleness she once loved, hoping to find some trace of remorse or doubt. Instead, she saw only steely resolve, He explained he'd fallen in love with another woman, Vanessa Carter, and though he had planned a more gentle revelation, he couldn't stomach living the lie any longer. Caroline wished she could put a face to this name Vanessa. The only clues she had were scattered comments James once made about a brilliant marketing consultant he'd hired to revamp his real estate firm's public image. Caroline recalled one particular evening at a corporate gala when James introduced her to Vanessa. At the time, the name was fleeting, overshadowed by a swirl of introductions. Vanessa was a tall woman with striking features, honey brown hair swept into a sophisticated chignon, piercing grey eyes, and a captivating confidence. Caroline remembered her feeling slightly uneasy that night, but she dismissed it as mere self-consciousness. Now, all the pieces fit together in a puzzle that only spelled betrayal. Although she was crushed, Caroline found a glimmer of courage deep within. The next morning, she hired a private investigator named Mark Stevenson, a seasoned professional recommended by a friend who had gone through a similarly devastating divorce. If James was leaving, Caroline wanted to know what she was up against. Part of her felt guilty for stooping to secrecy, but she told herself this was self-preservation. After all, James had shattered their vows. The least she could do was protect herself. As Mark started digging, Caroline pored over bank statements and financial records. She discovered that James had been funneling money into a secret account for months, perhaps even years. She found suspicious cash withdrawals, hotel receipts, and flamboyant purchases she never saw brought into the home. A swirl of questions crowded her mind. Was their entire marriage a sham? How long had James been planning this exit? The house was eerily silent in his absence. She wandered from room to room, occasionally finding reminders of him, a tie slung over the back of a chair, a nearly empty bottle of his cologne in the master bathroom. The smell of him lingered in the air. Every detail was laced with heartbreak, but more than anything, it infuriated her. She promised herself that she wouldn't let him walk away scot-free if that was indeed what he was planning. Soon, Mark emailed her a hefty file. It contained photographs of James and Vanessa at an upscale restaurant, or stepping out of a black limo, or holding hands at a weekend getaway in Hilton Head. The timestamps showed their rendezvous going back nearly 8 months. Caroline stared at the images until her eyes burned. There, in front of her, was incontrovertible proof of her husband's betrayal. Yet for all its painful clarity, it was only the beginning. Unknown to both James and Caroline, Vanessa Carter had her own buried truths, ones that would force them all to confront a reality more shocking than anything they had imagined. While Caroline grappled with the remnants of her life, James was riding the wave of his newfound freedom, reveling in Vanessa's affections. He relocated to a penthouse suite at the Renaissance Hotel, offering panoramic views of Charleston's historic harbor. The move was as much about convenience as it was about flaunting his wealth. He had no intention of hiding his affair any longer. The tabloids got wind of it, running stories with titles like "Real Estate Mogul James Blackwood Splits from Wife," accompanied by speculative commentary on who the mysterious mistress might be. For her part, Vanessa played the role of supportive partner, helping James pivot his real estate brand into new territory. With her marketing expertise, they positioned his firm for explosive growth across the southeastern region. They were photographed at high society functions, arms intertwined, the glimmer of success sparking in their eyes. James felt invincible. He had money, influence, and a mesmerizing woman on his arm. In his mind, the world was at his feet. Yet, behind Vanessa's polished exterior lingered an anxiety she couldn't shake. She spent hours on the phone with someone whose number she never saved under a real name, always stepping out on the terrace to ensure James wouldn't overhear. Sometimes, in the hush of early morning, she would break down in silent tears. James noticed the occasional puffiness around her eyes, but chalked it up to the stress of launching his new marketing campaign. The truth was, that Vanessa was living a double life, a precarious balancing act that threatened to collapse under the slightest pressure. In a hushed meeting at a coffee shop outside the city, Vanessa met with a man named Thomas Carlyle. He was not a business associate, not a relative. He was, in fact, her husband. Their marriage was a secret she had kept from James from the very beginning. Thomas was no millionaire. He was a school administrator in Charlotte, leading a quiet, unassuming life. Their relationship had deteriorated in the past year, especially after Vanessa took on James as a client and frequently traveled between Charlotte and Charleston. Thomas demanded explanations. "When are you coming back? Are we even going to salvage what's left of us?" In desperation, he told her he would file for a legal separation if she didn't end whatever fling she was having. But Vanessa didn't give him a straight answer. Instead, she pleaded for time to solidify her position in James's life, time to secure a windfall that would change her future forever. Thomas was torn between anger and lingering affection. He had never seen his wife so fixated on someone else. Vanessa tried to ease his mind by painting a rosy picture. "I'm doing this for us, for our future," she insisted. But the words rang hollow. She was playing a dangerous game, torn between a stable past and the promise of an extravagant future. With every day that passed, the tension mounted, and she knew it was only a matter of time before her secrets erupted to the surface. Caroline had initially thought that once James left, her heartbreak would be the hardest challenge to face. But the endless legal obstacles soon overshadowed her grief. The divorce proceedings commenced at a furious pace. James's legal team moved swiftly, aiming for a rapid settlement that seemed designed to corner Caroline into an unfavorable deal. They proposed a lump sum payment with strict conditions, including gag orders that would prevent Caroline from discussing the affair publicly. It was a classic power play, silence in exchange for money. Yet Caroline wasn't alone. She had enlisted the services of an astute divorce attorney, Beatrice Langston, known for her fierce advocacy in high-stakes cases. Beatrice advised Caroline that patience was the key. They would not accept any settlement that undermined Caroline's rights, especially after such a betrayal. With Mark Stevenson's investigation steadily unveiling more evidence of James's financial manipulations, Caroline hoped to secure a fair division of property, if not more, given the marital misconduct. Amid the negotiations, Caroline started receiving anonymous letters in her mailbox. The envelopes had no return address, the contents typed on plain paper. At first, she assumed they were from some reporter digging for scandalous material, but the tone was oddly empathetic. "You deserve to know the truth," read one. Another wrote, "She's not who she claims to be." There was also a photograph, a candid snapshot of Vanessa Carter in a tearful embrace with a man Caroline didn't recognize. Intrigued, she handed these letters over to Mark. If someone was trying to send her a message, she intended to follow the lead. Meanwhile, James was oblivious to the shadows forming around him. He was too busy finalizing big real estate deals to notice Vanessa's restlessness or the many calls she stepped out to make. If he ever questioned her absence, she would lean in, brush her lips against his, and promise him it was nothing but work. James, infatuated and overconfident, never doubted her story. He believed he was the apex predator in Charleston's social jungle, certain that everyone else was simply trying to catch up. But the truth was that Vanessa wasn't merely stepping out for clandestine calls with her husband Thomas. She was also in contact with someone named Olivia Pierce, an ambitious tabloid journalist who had built her career exposing the secrets of Charleston's elite. Olivia had a knack for sniffing out salacious stories, and Vanessa was offering her a gold mine on James and, potentially, on the entire Blackwood empire. If Vanessa could spin the narrative in a way that benefited her, perhaps she could secure a massive payoff from James to keep quiet about her own hidden life. The stage was set for a perfect storm. Caroline felt more determined than ever to protect herself and uncover the full extent of James's betrayal. Vanessa was playing both sides, entangled in a web of deception that grew more complex with each passing day. And James, arrogant and unprepared, was about to find out that betrayal cuts both ways, that sometimes the betrayer becomes the betrayed. While Caroline wrestled with the remnants of her marriage, James reveled in the thrill of his newfound freedom. He had moved into a lavish penthouse suite at the Renaissance Hotel, drawn by its sweeping harbor views and social prestige. Ever since admitting he was leaving Caroline, he had immersed himself in his affair with Vanessa, convinced he had traded up for a more dazzling future. Vanessa was more than just his lover. A master of marketing strategy, she orchestrated campaigns that elevated Blackwood Enterprises, posting updates that showcased James's leadership and their shared vision. Together, they navigated Charleston's elite circles like a power couple on the rise, cultivating an image of unshakable unity. Yet behind Vanessa's polished veneer, an unease simmered. She took phone calls in hushed tones and ended them if James approached, her voice taut with urgency. Sometimes she would gaze out from the penthouse balcony, the harbor lights reflected in her troubled eyes. James noticed her pensive moods and occasional forced smiles, but her excuses, client calls, urgent deadlines, business negotiations always seemed plausible enough. Caroline, meanwhile, struggled through an echoing home that felt emptier by the day. The silent rooms were a stark reminder of the life she had once believed invincible. Photographs of happier times only sharpened the ache of James's betrayal. Determined not to be cast aside, she sought help from her lawyer, Beatrice Langston, and a private investigator named Mark Stevenson. In the quiet hours after sunset, they pored over bank statements, payment records, and suspicious receipts that painted an unsettling picture of James's clandestine spending. Each discovery stung. Weekend getaways at charming inns, extravagant jewelry bills, high-priced dinners at exclusive restaurants. Every line item screamed of a carefully concealed affair that ran deeper than Caroline had imagined. It wasn't merely that James had found someone new, he had siphoned off resources they'd once shared, funneling them into a hidden life. If Caroline wanted justice, she needed to act decisively. For James, however, life felt triumphant. Vanessa's marketing genius had won him fresh admiration among Charleston's elite. Newspapers ran stories lauding his vision and ambition, and he hosted lavish parties that only amplified his image as a bold entrepreneur. At these events, Vanessa played the role of elegant partner to perfection, her body language radiating confidence. Together, they accepted congratulatory handshakes and toasts, never betraying a single crack in their carefully curated facade. But as soon as the spotlight dimmed, Vanessa's composure waned. Her phone would buzz, and she'd retreat to secluded corners to speak in urgent, clipped tones. Now and then, James caught snippets. "Give me more time, or I can't do that yet," hints of a second life he couldn't fully comprehend. Whenever he confronted her with mild concern, she'd redirect him with a well-timed smile or a brush of her hand against his arm, lulling him back into complacency. Caroline spent her days and nights analyzing every document Mark brought her. The deeper they dug, the more the numbers told a damning story. Thousands spent on gifts, lavish hotel stays that spanned entire weekends, and inflated consulting fees addressed to Vanessa. While these discoveries pushed Caroline toward despair, they also strengthened her resolve. She was done letting James call the shots. If he was determined to make a spectacle of her loss, she would fight back with facts. Occasionally, Caroline heard whispered rumors that Vanessa might be deceiving James as well. A friend of a friend claimed to have seen Vanessa at a high-end lounge with a man who definitely wasn't James. Another source mentioned seeing them slip into a sleek, unmarked car before driving off. Though Caroline took such stories with a grain of salt, part of her couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction at the possibility. At least James might learn what it was like to be on the receiving end of betrayal. James, for his part, dismissed any hint of Vanessa's possible indiscretions. Whenever the seed of suspicion threatened to sprout, he smothered it with self-assurances that he'd chosen a brilliant, ambitious woman. If she needed secrecy for her deals or marketing strategies, so be it. He told himself he was strong enough, confident enough, to handle any challenge she threw his way. Admitting doubt would mean questioning the entire foundation of his new life. One night, the quiet hush of the penthouse was broken by James's inability to sleep. He padded across the marble floors, intending to grab a glass of water, only to find Vanessa leaning over the balcony railing, phone pressed to her ear. Pale moonlight illuminated her tense features. The moment she saw him, she ended the call, stammering about urgent business. James studied her face, a ripple of uncertainty flickering through him. But when she sank into his arms with an apologetic smile, he allowed himself to believe her. Meanwhile, Caroline took the final steps toward legal confrontation. In Beatrice's law office, the two of them laid out evidence that suggested James had diverted marital assets to Vanessa's personal accounts. Page by page, line by line, the case against James grew stronger. Caroline felt a surge of righteous anger. He hadn't just broken her trust, he had attempted to undermine her financial security. If James thought he could discard her without consequences, he would soon realize how mistaken he was. Despite their differences, James and Caroline were both on converging paths, each propelled by forces they barely understood. James clung to illusions of Vanessa's loyalty, forging forward with grand business plans. Caroline, armed with mounting evidence, prepared for the day she would demand her due. And Vanessa herself loomed as a wild card, her secret phone calls and mysterious behavior threatening to unspool the narrative. Both James and Caroline believed they were living. In quieter moments, even James felt the faint tug of apprehension. He had staked everything on Vanessa, his heart, his reputation, his marriage. Could it be that he had misjudged her? The thought formed like a shadow in the back of his mind, swiftly dismissed before it could grow. He was James Blackwood, a man who prided himself on making the right moves. Doubting Vanessa would mean doubting himself. But storms rarely announce themselves gently. The layers of deceit that had been woven into James's flashy new life would not remain hidden forever. While Charleston's gleaming skyline offered a sense of continuity and grace, the undercurrent of secrets ran too strong to be contained. Each day brought the players in this twisted drama closer to a reckoning none of them could avoid. For Caroline, the battle lines were clear: stand firm, present the evidence, and refuse to be silenced by shame. For James, the future shimmered with promise, so long as he refused to look behind the curtain of Vanessa's perfect facade. And for Vanessa, juggling her various intrigues required increasingly careful maneuvers, lest the entire enterprise collapse under the weight of her own duplicity. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would test their resolve, expose their vulnerabilities, and determine the fate of all three. When the truth finally emerged, it would shatter more than one illusion and forever reshape the landscape of James and Caroline's once shared world. Their choices had led them here now. They had to face the consequences. Over the following weeks, the tension between James and Caroline escalated as divorce proceedings ground on. Beatrice Langston, Caroline's lawyer, was unrelenting, demanding full disclosure of James's assets. James's legal team pushed back, insisting that many of his holdings were independently acquired before the marriage. But the more they argued, the more evidence emerged that contradicted his version of events. The pressure weighed heavily on James, fueling late-night arguments with Vanessa in their penthouse suite. Though James never admitted it aloud, a small voice in the back of his mind questioned whether leaving Caroline so abruptly had been wise. Meanwhile, Caroline and Mark Stevenson worked tirelessly to piece together Vanessa's connections. They discovered that Thomas Carlyle was legally married to Vanessa. The bank transfers showed that James had unknowingly been depositing sums of money into an account managed by Vanessa and Thomas. On paper, these transactions appeared to be for consulting fees, but Mark's investigation revealed that no real consulting took place. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated scheme. Caroline wrestled with the dilemma of how to use this information. She wanted James to see the light that he had abandoned his wife for someone who had no qualms about using him. But she also had to be strategic. If she could present this evidence in court at the right time, it could shift the divorce settlement dramatically. Yet Caroline was torn between her desire for vindication and a lingering sadness over the ruin of her marriage. She couldn't help but remember the early days, when James's eyes sparkled with ambition, and how they once dreamed of traveling the world together. Those memories haunted her, fueling a mix of love and hate she couldn't fully reconcile. Late one evening, as she reviewed a new stack of documents, Caroline received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Olivia Pierce, the tabloid journalist who had been in contact with Vanessa. Caroline's heart pounded in her chest as she answered. Olivia, speaking in a hushed tone, revealed that Vanessa had been feeding her partial truths about James's finances. But Olivia suspected something bigger was at play. Vanessa's story kept changing, and Olivia's instincts told her that Vanessa was concealing crucial details. "I think she's trying to manipulate the press and the courts to her advantage," Olivia said, hinting that she had enough evidence to blow the story wide open. Caroline felt a strange camaraderie with this journalist she had never met. They were both circling the same enigma, trying to understand Vanessa Carter's endgame. Olivia proposed sharing information in exchange for an exclusive angle on the developing scandal. Caroline hesitated. Did she really want to fan these flames in the media? But the truth was, the more that came to light about Vanessa's double dealings, the better chance Caroline had of leveling the playing field against James and his legal powerhouse. She agreed to meet with Olivia in person to explore their options. As she ended the call, Caroline stared at the city lights shimmering outside her window. The lines between ally and adversary blurred in this high-stakes game. With each new revelation, she realized she was only scratching the surface of the deception that ran deeper than she ever imagined. At a discreet diner on the outskirts of Charleston, Caroline finally met Olivia Pierce. The journalist was in her early 30s, with sharp blue eyes and a notebook perpetually at hand. Over cups of coffee that quickly grew cold, Olivia laid out her suspicions. Vanessa had told her that James was a controlling partner, that she was nothing more than a scapegoat for his questionable business practices. Yet the financial documents Olivia had obtained told a different story, one where Vanessa stood to gain significantly, possibly even more than James himself. Caroline felt a sinking dread. This wasn't just about a mistress siphoning money. It hinted at orchestrated fraud, with Vanessa weaving a web of lies around multiple players. Olivia admitted she didn't have all the pieces, but she did have a trove of texts and emails hinting at Vanessa's communications with someone named TC. Caroline's heart leapt at the initials Thomas Carlyle. Vanessa's been playing James and TC off each other, Olivia mused, and I suspect she's been stoking the divorce for her own purposes. If Vanessa timed her revelations to the press perfectly, she could walk away with a massive payday from James, either in hush money or a settlement disguised as a marketing payout. Caroline decided to show Olivia the evidence Mark Stevenson had compiled, the damning bank transfers to T. Carlyle, the private investigator's photographs of Vanessa and Thomas in secret meetings, and the mysterious letters hinting that Vanessa was concealing more than just an affair. Olivia's eyes widened. The puzzle pieces fit together too neatly to be mere coincidence. If we go public with this, it could destroy Vanessa's credibility and, by extension, blow up James's claims in the divorce, Olivia said. But it'll be messy. That was an understatement. Caroline stood at a crossroads. She had spent the better part of her adult life supporting James, building a life she thought was grounded in mutual respect, only to be discarded when a more convenient partner came along. She felt a deep-seated urge for justice or perhaps vengeance. If she exposed Vanessa, James would be forced to confront the magnitude of his own betrayal. But there was no telling how that might influence the final settlement, or how the media frenzy might devour her own privacy. Still, Caroline found strength in the knowledge that she was not the one who had lied or schemed. She only wanted the truth. Before parting, Olivia handed Caroline a business card with a personal number scribbled on the back. "If you want to go on the record, call me," she said. Caroline nodded, grateful yet uneasy. She left the diner with a storm in her heart, uncertain of what her next move should be. That night, she paced in her living room, gazing at the framed photos of happier days with James. She wondered if exposing Vanessa would be a final severing of all ties, a point of no return that would erase any lingering sentiment she felt for her marriage. But perhaps that was precisely what she needed to end the chapter on a note of truth, no matter how painful, and find a path to reclaim her life from the wreckage. While Caroline wrestled with her moral quandary, James's life began to show the first real cracks. His real estate firm, Blackwood Enterprises, faced unexpected hiccups. A major investor pulled out of a lucrative development deal, citing unresolved legal complications. Rumors swirled that James's personal troubles were spilling into his business. To make matters worse, the tabloids had caught wind of his penthouse love nest and were questioning whether it was truly the fairy tale romance he and Vanessa portrayed. Vanessa, meanwhile, doubled down on her role as the doting partner in public. She organized a lavish fundraiser for James's new charitable venture, drumming up glowing press coverage. However, behind closed doors, their relationship grew tense. James sensed that Vanessa was hiding something. She would disappear for hours, return with a forced smile, and deflect his questions with vague excuses about client calls. In fleeting moments of introspection, James found himself missing Caroline, her straightforward warmth, the gentle way she would lay a hand on his shoulder, calming him after a stressful day. But he dismissed these thoughts as remnants of a past he'd already left behind. One afternoon, as James sat in his office scanning over land acquisition proposals, his secretary interrupted him. A man named Thomas Carlyle was in the lobby, insisting he had an urgent matter to discuss. James frowned. The name didn't register, but something about the man's persistence piqued his curiosity, and he agreed to see him. When Thomas stepped into the office, James was struck by the look of desperation in his eyes. Thomas introduced himself in a measured tone, though his voice trembled with suppressed anger. He told James he was Vanessa Carter's husband legally, on paper, a fact that no amount of spin could dismiss. James felt his world tilt. He stared at Thomas, trying to reconcile the words with the image. How was it possible that Vanessa could be married to someone else? The color drained from his face as Thomas revealed the entire story, how Vanessa had manipulated Thomas, stringing him along with promises that her relationship with James was just a short-term affair for financial gain. She needed capital, she claimed, to invest in a joint business venture that would eventually benefit both her and Thomas. Thomas provided proof, wedding certificates, text messages, and even letters from Vanessa promising him a share of the money once she secured enough from James. A storm of emotions raged inside James: anger, betrayal, humiliation. He felt the bitter irony of his situation. He had left his wife for a woman who was, herself, entangled in another marriage. Worse yet, he realized he might have been the pawn in Vanessa's grand plan. All his money, the lavish gifts, the marketing contracts, had it all been to line her pockets? Thomas revealed that he was done playing the quiet spouse. He wanted out of his toxic marriage and, in a twist, he offered James a proposition. If James paid Thomas a substantial sum of money, Thomas would disappear and relinquish any claims he had to Vanessa's potential earnings from James's businesses. Essentially, Thomas was extorting James. But from where James stood, it seemed like a lifeline, an opportunity to remove this man from the equation and salvage what remained of his pride. As Thomas left, James sank into his leather chair, reeling from the revelation. The mistress he had chosen over the only woman who ever truly cared for him was at the center of a web of lies. And there, in the middle of it all, he was left with nothing but regret and the looming threat of a scandal that could cost him not just his marriage, but the empire he had spent his life building. In the wake of Thomas's visit, James confronted Vanessa. He couldn't contain his rage as he hurled accusations at her, brandishing the documents Thomas had given him. Vanessa played it off at first, claiming Thomas was just a bitter ex who refused to move on. But the evidence was undeniable: wedding papers, shared financial accounts, and text messages confirming their ongoing relationship. Cornered, Vanessa switched tactics, sobbing dramatically, claiming that she had no choice but to keep Thomas at bay with money because he was threatening her. She insisted that her love for James was genuine, that she never meant for him to find out this way. James felt torn, a tempest of fury and hurt swirling within him. He demanded she leave the penthouse immediately. Vanessa's tears turned cold in an instant. Her wounded expression hardened, and she warned James not to make rash decisions. "I know more about your finances than you realize," she said, her voice quiet but seething with menace. "If you think you can just cast me aside without consequences, you're sorely mistaken." In that moment, James realized the precarious position he was in. Vanessa had access to confidential information about his upcoming deals, his partnerships, and potentially damaging details that could harm his reputation if made public. The memory of Caroline's unwavering support stung him like a fresh wound. He had cast aside the one person who truly had his back for a woman who threatened to ruin him if she didn't get her way. When Vanessa finally gathered her things and left, James stood alone in the penthouse. The city lights flickered through the panoramic windows, mocking him. He thought back to the day he told Caroline he was leaving her. His arrogance had blinded him to the reality that sometimes the allure of something new can mask a darker agenda. For the first time, he felt genuine remorse for breaking Caroline's heart and for his own foolishness. That night, James's phone buzzed with a call from his lawyer, alerting him to new motions filed by Caroline's legal team, requesting a thorough forensic audit of his finances. Panic set in. He knew that this audit could also expose any dubious transactions made under Vanessa's guidance. Moreover, the media was starting to smell blood. Gossip columns were leaking details about Vanessa's sudden move out of James's penthouse, speculating that the new power couple was already on the rocks. Meanwhile, Caroline found a surprising sense of calm in the chaos. The revelations about Vanessa validated her instincts. James's mistress was not simply a woman in love, but a conniving manipulator. Caroline didn't revel in James's downfall, but she recognized it as the bitter fruit of his own choices. She kept in close contact with Mark Stevenson and Olivia Pierce, providing them with the materials they needed to expose the entire fiasco if necessary. Unbeknownst to all, Vanessa had not played her last card. She was meeting with lawyers of her own, plotting a strategy to come out on top, financially and reputationally. She had a trove of documents that could tarnish James's name and even implicate him in questionable business dealings. If she leveraged them correctly, she could still secure an enormous settlement, or at least blackmail her way into riches. In the shadows of Charleston's gleaming skyline, the final act of betrayal was about to unfold. The atmosphere in the Charleston courthouse crackled with tension when James, Caroline, and their respective legal teams convened for a major divorce hearing. Reporters hovered outside the tall wooden doors, hoping to catch a glimpse of the estranged couple. Rumors ran rampant. Would James attempt to reconcile? Had Caroline uncovered more of his shady dealings? Was Vanessa going to make an appearance, or would she remain a spectre looming over the proceedings? Caroline was nervous, yet she carried herself with quiet determination, wearing a tailored navy suit. By her side, Beatrice Langston stood poised, a calm but formidable presence who had orchestrated an airtight case against James's claims. On the opposite side of the courtroom, James appeared haggard. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and the once unshakable confidence he wore like armor had diminished into grim resolve. When the proceedings began, Caroline's team presented evidence of James's financial misconduct. Documents highlighted suspicious transfers, shell corporations, and accounts linked to Vanessa Carter. Although not illegal on their own, these transactions raised enough red flags to cast doubt on James's narrative of a fair and amicable separation. Tensions escalated when Caroline's lawyer questioned James on the stand, asking if he was aware that Vanessa Carter was legally married to another man during their affair. James's jaw tightened, and his gaze flickered to the spectators, aware that the entire room was witnessing his humiliation. A turning point came when a sudden commotion at the rear of the courtroom caused heads to turn. In strode Vanessa Carter, wearing a crisp blazer and pencil skirt, her posture impeccably straight. She marched forward, her own attorney trailing behind, and requested to address the court. Shockwaves rippled through the gallery. No one had anticipated her appearance, least of all James. Vanessa began by presenting herself as a victim of circumstance, claiming that she had fallen in love with James while estranged from her husband, Thomas Carlyle. She admitted she kept her marriage a secret, but only because she feared Thomas's reaction. As she spoke, however, her tone shifted from self-pity to accusation. She alleged that James had pressured her into funneling money for tax purposes and that she was merely following his orders. She dropped hints of white-collar crimes, insinuating that James had used her to launder funds for shady deals. James erupted, calling Vanessa a liar. He insisted she orchestrated everything to siphon money from him, brandishing text messages that demonstrated her manipulative tactics. The courtroom devolved into pandemonium. Lawyers argued back and forth, the judge hounded by demands to either strike Vanessa's testimony or consider new evidence. In the midst of this chaos, Caroline sat, stunned at the spectacle unfolding before her. She realized that the man she had once loved was now tangled in an ever-widening net of deceit, fighting for his professional survival even more than his personal redemption. When the judge finally restored order, he ruled that more investigation was needed regarding the financial accusations. He announced a postponement of the ruling on the divorce settlement, giving both parties time to review the new allegations. A wave of exhaustion swept through Caroline. She had hoped this hearing would move her closer to closure. Instead, it ended in an explosive escalation, with Vanessa now threatening to bring James down alongside her if it suited her agenda. In the days that followed, the media had a field day dissecting every dramatic moment of the courthouse clash. Olivia Pierce's tabloid ran the headline, "Millionaire betrayed by Mistress, fraud allegations rock James Blackwood." Public opinion began to shift. Once seen as the archetypal wealthy philanderer who callously left his devoted wife, James was now painted as both a perpetrator and a possible victim of financial deceit. Caroline kept her distance from the swirling storm. She retreated to the modest home she grew up in, visiting her parents who still lived in Greenville. Sitting in her childhood bedroom, she gazed at old photographs, memories of simpler times. She felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. Relief that she was no longer trapped in James's web of ambition, heartbreak at how thoroughly their once promising love had deteriorated. Surrounded by her parents' quiet support, she took time to reflect on how she would move forward once the legal dust finally settled. Meanwhile, James was in free fall. Investors grew wary of his leadership. One by one, high-profile clients severed ties with Blackwood Enterprises, not wanting to be associated with scandal. Rumors circulated that James was liquidating assets to cover potential lawsuits, as well as to placate Vanessa and Thomas Carlyle, both of whom seemed eager to cash in on James's desperation. James scrambled to contain the damage, hiring a crisis management team and releasing carefully worded statements proclaiming his innocence. But the public was hungry for more salacious details, and no amount of polished PR could halt the speculation. Vanessa, ever calculating, saw an opening to leverage the chaos for her own benefit. If James was desperate, he might pay her handsomely to silence her allegations of financial impropriety, allegations that, whether true or not, could sink him. She arranged a covert meeting at a high-end restaurant, demanding a settlement so large it bordered on extortion. In return, she would sign a non-disclosure agreement about James's business practices. Cornered and furious, James agreed in principle, but insisted that she provide evidence that exonerated him from wrongdoing. They reached a tense stalemate, neither trusting the other enough to act first. While James struggled to juggle these ticking time bombs, a surprising ally emerged. Thomas Carlyle, newly emboldened, decided to meet privately with Caroline. He hoped to come clean about Vanessa's manipulations, to share any information that might strengthen Caroline's legal position against James, and by extension, cut off Vanessa's primary source of funding. They met in the same diner where Caroline had first spoken with Olivia Pierce. Over coffee, Thomas detailed how Vanessa bragged about taking James for a ride. She had told Thomas she would squeeze James dry, then disappear with the money. Thomas himself wanted only one thing: to be rid of Vanessa and the toxic marriage they shared. He saw Caroline as the only person who could stand up to Vanessa and James in court, with enough moral high ground to come out on top. Caroline listened carefully, her emotions a mixture of empathy for Thomas's plight and deep disdain for Vanessa's cunning. She realized that in a twisted way, all of them, Caroline, Thomas, and James, had been Vanessa's pawns at one point or another. United by common betrayal, they forged a reluctant alliance. If they worked together to expose Vanessa's lies, perhaps they could free themselves from her manipulations once and for all. With the divorce hearing rescheduled for the following week, time was running out, and the stage was set for an explosive final confrontation that would decide the fate of everyone involved. On the day of the rescheduled divorce hearing, a hush settled over the courtroom as Caroline, James, and their assembled legal teams waited for the judge. This time, Thomas Carlyle sat in the gallery, a silent presence bearing witness to the final reckoning. Vanessa Carter was also there, eyes cold, her lawyer whispering instructions. The tension was palpable, like the quiet before a storm. The judge called the court to order, emphasizing the gravity of the allegations. Both sides were given the opportunity to present new evidence. Caroline's attorney began, methodically laying out the chain of bank transfers, linking Vanessa to Thomas Carlyle and tying them back to James's accounts. Screens displayed images of text messages and emails that Mark Stevenson's investigation had uncovered. Caroline sat with her eyes focused straight ahead, determined to see this through. Next, James's lawyer attempted to dismantle Vanessa's claims. He argued that Vanessa had manipulated James, forging documents and creating a narrative that painted him as complicit in financial fraud. A hush fell when James himself took the stand. Under oath, he admitted to leaving Caroline for Vanessa, but he also confessed that he had been blind to Vanessa's ulterior motives. He disavowed any wrongdoing in business dealings, blaming Vanessa for forging or doctoring certain records, an accusation that sent Vanessa into a fiery outburst. Security guards stood ready, anticipating the heated exchange. Vanessa then took the stand, her demeanor shifting from control to furious. She accused James of being the mastermind behind every shady transaction. Her attorney produced documents that cast doubt on James's innocence. The entire courtroom was caught in a volley of allegations and counter-allegations, each side hurling damaging evidence at the other. Observers whispered that this was more than a divorce hearing. It was a high-stakes showdown where no one would walk away unscathed. Then came the moment Thomas Carlyle stepped up, choosing to speak as a witness. Everyone watched in suspense, aware that Thomas's testimony could tilt the scales one way or another. He took the oath and proceeded to recount his conversations with Vanessa, revealing how she had planned to extort James from the start. Text messages he presented showed Vanessa bragging about milking James's fortune. She even explained her strategy in detail, how she would push Caroline into a bitter divorce, ensuring James stayed reliant on her marketing skills and locked in a cycle of guilt and secrecy. The revelation exploded like a firecracker. Vanessa's face blanched. She tried to interrupt, yelling that Thomas was lying. But the judge sternly called for order. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously organized. In a final blow, Caroline's attorney revealed that, thanks to Thomas's cooperation, they possessed timestamps and digital footprints, confirming that Vanessa, not James, had initiated many of the questionable financial transactions. What followed was a flurry of legal deliberations. The judge, appalled by the manipulative tapestry laid bare, ruled that the divorce settlement should heavily favor Caroline, given the emotional distress and financial risks James had subjected her to. As for Vanessa, she now faced potential lawsuits for fraud, among other charges. The judge made it clear that further criminal investigation might follow, and that no settlement with James would protect her from that scrutiny. In the aftermath, James sat in stunned silence. His empire lay in tatters, his reputation marred, and he was saddled with a gargantuan divorce payout. Caroline stood up from her seat, tears threatening to spill, but held at bay by relief. She glanced once more at James, feeling a strange pang of pity. In the end, they both lost something precious, but only one of them had a chance to rebuild without the burden of betrayal hanging over their head. Outside the courtroom, the flash of cameras greeted Caroline. She took a deep breath, grateful for the swirl of fresh air. Beatrice Langston gently guided her away from the throng of reporters. Nearby, Thomas stared at Vanessa, who glared back at him before storming off, her future uncertain. Quietly, Thomas nodded to Caroline, and they parted ways. Caroline exhaled, realizing the weight she had been carrying for so long was finally lifting. The world spun on, the sun shone overhead, and in that moment, the possibility of a new beginning felt more real than ever. In the end, James Blackwood learned a harsh lesson. In betraying Caroline for the illusion of something grander, he himself became the ultimate victim of deceit. Caroline, once cast aside, discovered her own strength and walked away not just with a fair settlement, but with the empowerment to forge a new path. Vanessa's secret, which she thought would be her golden ticket to fortune, proved to be her undoing, unmasking her as a cunning manipulator willing to betray anyone, including her own husband. Thomas, for a shot at wealth, Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster of love, betrayal, and redemption.
A penthouse overlooking Central Park, a walk-in closet overflowing with Hermes, and a baby on the way. Anya had it all. Or so she thought. In the blink of an eye, her billionaire husband, a man who once promised her the world, stood before her, his words colder than the winter wind whipping across their panoramic window. "I want a divorce." But before the ink could dry on the papers, a knock on the door changed everything. His mistress wasn't there to gloat. She was there to expose a secret so dark it would make his demand for a divorce the least of Anya's worries. The scent of blooming peonies and old money filled the air of the penthouse apartment on the 82nd floor of 432 Park Avenue. It was a sterile, curated scent, one that Anya had come to associate with her life, beautiful, expensive, and utterly devoid of the earthy reality she secretly craved. From this height, New York City was a glittering, silent diorama. The yellow cabs were ants, the sprawling green of Central Park, a manicured carpet, and the people, the millions of bustling, striving souls, were entirely insignificant. Just like her. Anya traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the stark minimalist decor Julian insisted upon. Everything was shades of grey chrome and glass. It was the home of a man who admired his reflections both literal and financial. He called it uncluttered. Anya called it empty. Her hand drifted down to the gentle swell of her stomach, a 6-month bump that was her only true possession in this sky-high palace. This baby, her baby, was the one vibrant, chaotic, and real thing in her life. It was a secret garden she nurtured within herself, a world away from Julian's meticulous control. Julian Croft. To the world, he was a titan of industry, a visionary in the volatile world of tech mergers and acquisitions. His face, all sharp angles and disarming smiles, graced the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. He had a Midas touch, turning fledgling startups into billion-dollar unicorns with a flick of his pen. He had swept Anya off her feet 5 years ago. She was a junior art curator, then full of opinions and passion, and he had seemed utterly captivated by her spirit. He'd courted her with the kind of grand cinematic gestures that leave a woman breathless, a private viewing at the Met, a weekend trip to Paris, on a whim a rare first-edition book of poetry she'd once mentioned in passing. He had built a gilded cage for her, and she, dazzled by the shine, had walked right in. She'd given up her small gallery job, her cramped but cozy apartment in the village, and her circle of wonderfully messy artistic friends. Julian had said he wanted to give her the world. She hadn't realized he meant he wanted to become her entire world. The sound of the private elevator chiming its arrival pulled her from her reverie. Julian was home. Early. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach, a feeling that had become increasingly familiar over the past few months. He strode into the living area, looking every inch the master of the universe. His bespoke Tom Ford suit clung perfectly to his athletic frame, his dark hair was impeccably styled, and his face held the neutral, unreadable expression he reserved for high-stakes negotiations. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the panoramic view, as if calculating its net worth. Julian Anya began, her voice softer than she intended. "You're home. I was just about to have the chef start on dinner." He turned then, and the coldness in his eyes extinguished the small flicker of hope in her chest. There was no warmth, no flicker of recognition for his pregnant wife. It was the look he gave a line item on a balance sheet that was underperforming. "Don't bother," he said, his voice flat and clipped. He walked over to the marble bar, and poured himself a whiskey, the clink of the decanter against the glass, unnaturally loud in the silent room. "We need to talk, Anya." Anya's hand instinctively went back to her belly, a protective gesture. "Is everything all right? Did the deal with the Japanese consortium fall through?" She tried to grasp for a familiar topic, a corner of his life she was still permitted to understand. He took a long swallow of his drink, his throat bobbing. "The deal is fine. Everything in my life is perfectly aligned. Except this." He gestured vaguely between them, an all-encompassing wave that dismissed their 5 years of marriage. Their shared bed, the child growing inside her. This, she whispered, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. This marriage, he stated, turning to face her fully. His face was a mask of detached finality. "It's run its course. It no longer serves its purpose. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, sharp and deadly, like shards of glass from the panoramic window he so admired. Anya felt the blood drain from her face. She must have misheard. This was Julian's idea of a joke, a cruel, power-playing jest to see her squirm. "A divorce," she stammered, a hysterical little laugh escaping her lips. "Julian, what are you talking about?" "I'm pregnant. We're having a baby." "I'm aware of the child's existence," he said, his voice laced with an icy patience that was more terrifying than any shout. "My lawyers have already been instructed to be generous. A trust will be established for the child. You will be provided with a settlement that will allow you to live very comfortably. A nice apartment, a staff, whatever you need. You will want for nothing materially." Materially. The word was an insult, a deliberate reduction of her life, her love, her very being to a transaction. The man who had once quoted poetry to her was now liquidating her like a bad asset. "I don't want a settlement, Julian. I want my husband. I want the father of my child." Her voice cracked, the carefully constructed composure of the perfect wife, shattering into a million pieces. Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. "What has happened to you? What has happened to us? Nothing has happened," he insisted, his calm unwavering. He was a stone wall, impervious to her pain. "This was always a contract, Anya. An arrangement. You provided beauty, social grace, a certain aesthetic. I provided a lifestyle beyond your wildest dreams. The contract is now being terminated." "A contract?" She stared at him aghast. The last 5 years replayed in her mind, now tainted and twisted by his cruel words. Every shared laugh, every tender touch, every whispered promise now felt like a lie, a performance. She felt a wave of nausea so profound it had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She had been a fool, a beautiful, well-kept, blind fool. "There's someone else, isn't there?" The question was a classic, a cliché she never thought she'd utter. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed his face. Not guilt, but a flicker of annoyance, as if she were a fly buzzing around his head. "That's irrelevant to the situation." "Irrelevant?" she cried, her voice rising. "You're throwing me out pregnant with your child, and you tell me your mistress is irrelevant. Who is she, Julian?" He walked over to the sleek obsidian desk in the corner and pulled a thick document from a leather briefcase. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table between them. The sound was a final, definitive thud. "These are the divorce papers," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "My lawyers advise you to sign them without contest. A prolonged, messy battle will not be..." beneficial for you, or for the public's perception of you. I have a reputation to maintain. He was threatening her. He was threatening to paint her as a gold digger, a shrew, to drag her name through the mud while he stood pristine on his mountain of money. The cruelty was breathtaking. He wasn't just ending their marriage. He was trying to erase her, to control the very narrative of her existence, even as he expelled her from his. She looked from the papers to his cold, handsome face. The man she loved, or the man she thought she loved, was gone. In his place stood a monster, a creature of pure, unadulterated avarice and ego. A profound, chilling clarity washed over her. The shock receded, replaced by a nascent, unfamiliar anger. "No," she said, her voice trembling, but firm. Julian raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. No. I will not sign these. I will not be discarded like one of your failed investments. This child, she said, her hand protectively cradling her belly, deserves a father. And I deserve an explanation. A real one. Julian's jaw tightened. He was not used to being told no. The air crackled with his silent fury. He took a step towards her, his physical presence suddenly feeling overwhelming, threatening. "You are making a grave mistake, Anya," he hissed. "You have no idea what you're messing with. You have no idea the forces at play here. Sign the papers. Take the money. Disappear quietly. It's the best option for everyone." His words held a hidden weight, a darker undercurrent that went beyond a simple sordid affair. The forces at play here. It wasn't the plea of a man in love with someone else. It was a warning, a threat. Before Anya could respond, before she could decipher the strange, panicked glint in his eyes, the chime of the private elevator echoed through the penthouse once more. Both their heads snapped towards the sound. Julian's face for the first time that evening lost its composure. A flash of pure, unadulterated panic crossed his features so quick that Anya almost missed it. He looked trapped. "Who is that?" Anya asked, her own confusion mounting. They weren't expecting anyone. Julian guarded their privacy with a zeal that bordered on paranoid. "Don't." Julian breathed, his eyes wide, as he stared at the elevator doors. It wasn't a command to Anya, but a desperate plea to the universe. The polished steel doors slid open with a soft, expensive sigh. Standing in the doorway was a woman. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with raven black hair cut into a sharp, severe bob, and eyes the color of emeralds. She wore a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, bloody slash of color in the monochrome world of Julian's penthouse. Anya's heart stopped. It had to be her. The mistress. She had come to gloat, to witness the final destruction of the wife to claim her prize. Anya braced herself for the humiliation, the final crushing blow. But the woman's eyes weren't on Anya. They were locked on Julian, and they held no trace of triumph. Her beautiful face was pale. Her hands were trembling, and her emerald eyes were wide with a terror that mirrored the panic on Julian's face. She took a shaky step into the room. "Julian," the woman, said, her voice a ragged whisper that cut through the silence. "It's over. They know. They know everything." Julian stared at her, his mask of control utterly shattered. He looked like a man staring at his own ghost. Anya looked back and forth between her husband and this beautiful, terrified stranger. A cold dread far deeper and more terrifying than the pain of betrayal began to creep up her spine. This wasn't about a simple affair. Julian's strange warning, his panic, this woman's fear, it was all connected to something far bigger. The divorce papers lay on the table, forgotten. The gilded cage had just burst open, but Anya had a sickening feeling that she hadn't been set free. She had just been tossed into the fire. The woman in the crimson dress took another hesitant step into the cavernous living room. Her designer heels, which should have clicked with authority on the polished marble floor, were instead unnervingly silent, as if she were trying to retract her own presence. Anya's mind, still reeling from the whiplash of the divorce demand, struggled to process this new bizarre tableau. The mistress, for who else could she be, wasn't acting like a victor. She was acting like a fugitive. Isabel. What the hell are you doing here? Julian finally managed to say, his voice a strangled rasp. He shot a venomous glare at her, a look that was less about a spurned lover and more about a co-conspirator who had broken rank. He moved almost unconsciously to position himself between Isabel and Anya, a futile attempt to control the flow of information. "I tried to call you Isabel," said her voice trembling. She ignored Anya completely, her gaze fixed on Julian's increasingly frantic expression. "Your phone was off. I left a dozen messages with your secretary. I had to come. We don't have any time." "Time for what?" Anya interjected, her voice finding a new steely edge. The initial shock was beginning to curdle into suspicion. "Time to coordinate your stories before you throw me out." Isabel's head snapped towards Anya, and for the first time she seemed to truly see her. There was no malice in her emerald eyes, no smug superiority. Instead, Anya saw a flicker of something that looked unnervingly like pity. It was an expression that infuriated Anya more than any taunt could have. "This has nothing to do with your marriage," Isabel said, with a dismissive wave of her hand that was so absolute it was chilling. "That's just collateral damage. A loose end he was trying to tie up." "A loose end," Anya repeated the words, tasting like ash. She looked at Julian, whose face was now a ghastly shade of pale. "Is that what I am to you, Julian? A loose end?" "Shut up!" Isabel Julian roared, finally losing the last vestige of his icy control. He lunged towards her, grabbing her arm. "You shouldn't be here. We had a plan. The plan is shot to hell." "Julian." Isabel wrenched her arm free, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a surge of anger. "The plan went up in smoke the moment my brother's name appeared on the SEC's inquiry list this morning. The acronym hung in the air, SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The federal agency that policed Wall Street, the boogeyman of every high-flying financier. It was a name Anya knew from the headlines from the periphery of Julian's world, but it had never felt real, never had any bearing on her curated life. Until now. What SEC inquiry Anya demanded, stepping forward. She was no longer just a passive victim in a domestic drama. She was an unwilling participant in something far more sinister. "Julian, what is she talking about?" "She's talking nonsense." Julian spat, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist 82 floors in the sky. "She's hysterical. Her brother made some bad investments, and now she's panicking and trying to drag me into it. He was trying to rebuild his wall of composure, but the cracks were showing. His hands were trembling, and a thin sheen of sweat had broken out on his forehead. Bad investments." Isabel let out a sharp, bitter laugh that held no humor. "Is that what you call it? You used him. Julian, You used my family's brokerage firm as a shield. You ran the entire scheme through their accounts, made them look like the masterminds while you stayed clean. Scheme. The word was a poison dart. Anya's gaze swung back to Julian. His entire empire, his Midas touch, was it all just a trick? A lie, just like their marriage? "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice low and threatening as he took a step towards Isabel. "And I suggest you leave now before you say something you'll regret." "No." Isabel stood her ground, her chin held high. The fear was still there, but it was now bolstered by a desperate, cornered resolve. "I'm not taking the fall for you. My brother is not going to prison for you. I loved you, Julian, or I thought I did, but I see what you are now. You don't love anyone. You consume them. You use them up, and then you discard the husk." Her eyes flickered to Anya. "She knows." "Don't you?" Anya thought back. The last 6 months, Julian's increasing secrecy, his late nights at the office, which she had assumed were due to his affair, the strange hushed phone calls he would take in his study, ending them abruptly if she walked in, the way he had systematically isolated her, severing her ties to her old friends, even discouraging visits from her own family, claiming he wanted to protect her peace and privacy during her pregnancy. It hadn't been about protecting her. It had been about isolating a witness. What scheme, Julian Anya's voice was dangerously quiet. The tears were gone. In their place was a cold, terrifying calm. "What did you do?" "Anya, listen to me," Julian said, turning to her, his voice attempting a gentleness that now sounded grotesque and manipulative. "She's a scorned woman. She's trying to ruin me because I ended our affair. It's the oldest story in the book. You're my wife. You're the mother of my child. It's you I'm trying to protect." He was trying to play her to use their shared history and their unborn child as a shield. But the spell was broken. She could see the puppeteer's strings. "Protect," she repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. "By demanding a divorce an hour ago, by calling me a loose end, you needed to tie up. You weren't trying to protect me. You were trying to cut me loose before the ship sank, weren't you? You wanted to make sure I couldn't claim a single cent of your precious, dirty money when it all came crashing down." The truth of it hit her with the force of a physical blow. The divorce wasn't about his love for Isabel. It was a calculated financial maneuver. A preemptive strike in a war he knew was coming. He was willing to make his own pregnant wife a refugee from his life to save himself. "It's called a SPAC," Isabel said. Suddenly, her voice sharp and clear. She was no longer speaking just to Julian, but to Anya, to the room, to the universe. She was confessing. "A special purpose acquisition company. It's the cleanest grift on Wall Street right now." Anya had heard Julian talk about SPACs. He'd called them blank check companies, a faster, more efficient way to take a private company, public bypassing the rigorous scrutiny of a traditional IPO. He had launched 3 of them in the last 2 years, raising billions from investors eager to get in on the ground floor of his next big thing. The media had lauded him as an innovator. Your husband, Isabel, continued, her voice gaining a morbid momentum, is a master at selling dreams. He would launch a SPAC, promising to merge it with a revolutionary tech company. The hype alone would send the stock soaring. Investors from massive hedge funds to ordinary people would pour their life savings into it all, based on his reputation. She paused, taking a shaky breath. But there was no company, Anya. There was never any revolutionary tech. It was all smoke and mirrors. A shell game. Julian lunged for her again. "You're lying, am I?" Isabel sidestepped him, her eyes burning with a righteous fury. "Tell her about Project Chimera, Julian. Tell her about the next-gen AI integration platform that was going to change the world. Show her the fancy prospectus, the one with the fabricated data and the photoshopped pictures of a non-existent office in Silicon Valley." She turned back to Anya, her voice dropping. "The money from the investors. It wasn't used for acquisitions. It was funneled, laundered through a complex web of offshore accounts and shell corporations, one of which was my brother's unwitting firm. Julian would skim off hundreds of millions, paying off early investors with money from new ones to keep the illusion going. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, Anya just dressed up in a fancy Wall Street suit. And the whole thing is about to collapse." Anya stared at Julian, waiting for him to deny it, to rage, to offer some plausible explanation. But he said nothing. He simply stood there, breathing heavily, the cornered animal, the master of the universe, brought low by a single, unraveling thread. The entire foundation of her life, the penthouse, the clothes, the art, the security was not just built on lies, but on theft, on the stolen dreams and life savings of countless unknown people. She felt a dizzying vertigo, the floor seeming to drop away beneath her. Her hand flew to her stomach, to the one pure thing in this world of deceit. This child, her son or daughter, was heir to a fortune that didn't exist, a legacy of shame. So the divorce. Anya trailed off, the full, monstrous picture becoming clear. The settlement you offered me, that generous trust for our peaceful child. Where was that money coming from, Julian? He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the dark, terrifying truth. "It's the last of the clean money, isn't it?" she whispered in horror. "The money you had before all this started. You were trying to firewall it, to put it in my name and the baby's name so the SEC couldn't touch it when they came for the rest. You weren't giving me a gift. You were using your pregnant wife and your unborn child as a money mule." The silence that followed was a confession. It was the most damning sound Anya had ever heard. The man she had married was not just a cheat or a liar. He was a predator of the highest order, and he had just tried to make her his final accomplice. The doorbell chimed, not the private elevator this time, but the main service door to the apartment. A loud, insistent official buzzing. It was a sound none of them could ignore. Julian, Isabel, and Anya all froze, their three-person drama instantly rendered insignificant. This was no longer a private implosion. The outside world was knocking. Julian's eyes, wide with terror, met Anya's. The last shred of his bravado was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a man whose time had run out. The buzzing came again, longer this time, more demanding. "Don't answer it," Julian whispered, a desperate, futile command. But Anya was already walking towards the door. The fog of her shock and betrayal was beginning to clear, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had been a pawn in his game for far too long. The game was over. Her hand closed around the cold steel handle of the door. Whatever was on the other side, it was the beginning of her new reality. She had to face it, for herself and for the child she carried. She pulled the door open. Standing in the hallway were two men in dark, conservative suits. They were nondescript, their faces impassive, but they carried an aura of unshakable authority that made the air in the multi-million-dollar penthouse feel cheap and thin. One of them held up a badge and an official-looking document. Julian Croft, the lead agent, asked, his voice calm and professional, but with an underlying steel that tolerated no argument. His eyes flicked past Anya to where Julian stood frozen in the middle of the living room. "I'm Agent Miller with the FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises." The FBI. The letters seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen out of the room. It was one thing to hear the acronym SEC from a panicked Mistress. It was another to see the flesh and blood embodiment of a federal investigation standing on your doorstep. Julian looked as if he had been turned to stone. The blood had drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy grey pallor. He stared at the agents, his mouth slightly agape. The master manipulator suddenly a speechless puppet. Isabel let out a small, choked sob and sank onto one of the ridiculously expensive minimalist sofas, her crimson dress pooling around her like a stain. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by the grim resignation of someone who had pulled the pin on a grenade and was now simply waiting for the blast. Agent Miller and his partner stepped into the apartment, their sensible shoes making solid, real-world sounds on the marble floor. Anya stepped back, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. She was watching a movie of her own life imploding. The agent's eyes swept the room, cataloguing the art, the furniture, the view, not with admiration, but with the cold appraisal of an asset seizure. "We also have a warrant for your arrest. Mr. Croft." Agent Miller continued in the same dispassionate tone, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "For conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering." The words were a death sentence, a formal indictment of everything Isabel had just revealed. The Ponzi scheme project, Chimera. The stolen money, it was all real. And now the consequences were real too. "This is a mistake," Julian finally stammered, his voice weak and unconvincing. "My lawyers." "Your lawyers have been notified," Agent Miller cut him off smoothly. "They can meet you downtown. Please place your hands behind your back." The sight of Julian Croft, the titan of Wall Street, the man whose confident smirk had sold billions in fraudulent dreams, being handcuffed in his own living room, was surreal. The metallic click of the cuffs locking into place was the final definitive sound of his world ending. He didn't resist. The fight was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed shock. As the second agent began to lead Julian towards the door, Isabel suddenly stood up, her face streaked with tears, but her voice filled with a new urgent terror. "Wait!" she cried out, her voice sharp. "That's not all. That's not the real reason." Agent Miller paused, turning to her with a look of mild professional interest. "The real reason for what, ma'am?" "For the divorce," she said, pointing a trembling finger at Julian. "For why he had to get her out. It's not just about the money. There's something else. Something worse." Anya, who had been standing silently by the wall, felt a new wave of ice-cold dread. Worse. What could possibly be worse than a billion-dollar fraud that had ruined countless lives? What was the dark secret that even a massive financial crime was meant to cover up? Julian's head snapped up. He shot a look at Isabel, a look of pure murderous rage mixed with desperate pleading. "Isabel, no. Don't. I have to," she sobbed. "They need to know everything. They need to know why you were so desperate." She turned to the agents, her words tumbling out in a frantic, disjointed rush. "The SPACs. The fraud. That was the end game. But it started somewhere else. It started with his first company. Gen-Tech Solutions. Anya vaguely remembered the name. It was the company Julian had founded before they met the one that had given him his initial millions and launched his reputation as a tech prodigy. He had sold it for a massive profit years ago. "What about it?" Agent Miller asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. Gen-Tech's flagship product was a proprietary data encryption software. Isabel explained, her voice gaining clarity as she forced the story out. It was sold to dozens of high-level corporate clients, banks, law firms, private equity funds. They promised impenetrable security. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Anya's. The pity was back in her gaze, but now it was deeper, darker, filled with a horror that Anya couldn't yet comprehend. But it wasn't an encryption software, Anya. It was a key. Julian built a back door into the system, a master key that gave him access to everything. For years, he had a live feed into the most sensitive corporate data in the country. Mergers and acquisitions plans, confidential legal strategies, insider trading information. The scale of it was dizzying. Julian hadn't just been a con artist. He had been a digital phantom, a ghost in the machine, systematically stealing the lifeblood of the corporate world. That's how he made his first fortune. Isabel continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It wasn't genius. It was theft on an industrial scale. He knew which companies were going to be acquired before they did. He knew which stocks would soar and which would plummet. He wasn't predicting the market. He was reading the script. The agents exchanged a look. This was new information. This went beyond the SPACs. This was the origin story of his entire criminal enterprise. But that's still not the secret. Isabel choked out, tears streaming down her face again. That's just more fraud. Then what is it? Anya finally spoke, her voice a hollow echo in the room. She had to know. She had to know the final, terrible truth that was poisoning the very air she breathed. Isabel's gaze was fixed on Anya's pregnant belly. 2 years ago, one of the companies he was spying on, a pharmaceutical firm called Biovance, they were on the verge of a major breakthrough, a revolutionary new gene therapy treatment. But they had a problem. Their final human trials were showing some irregularities, dangerous side effects that they were trying to solve before announcing the drug. Julian was now shaking his head violently, his muffled pleas ignored by the agent holding him. "Don't say it, Isabel. Please." Julian knew the drug was flawed. Isabel forged on her voice, cracking with the weight of her confession. He had access to the raw, hidden data. He knew it was dangerous. But he also knew that if another company acquired Biovance, before the flaws were public, the stock would triple overnight. So he used his insider information. He leaked the news of the potential breakthrough without mentioning the dangerous side effects to a rival corporation. They initiated a hostile takeover, and Julian, having bought millions in Biovance stock beforehand, made a fortune. Over $200 million in a single week. That's insider trading. A huge case, but Agent Miller prompted. But it wasn't just insider trading. Isabel screamed, the sound raw and agonizing. The new company, eager to recoup their investment, rushed the drug to market. They buried the flawed data. They pushed it through a compromised approval process. The drug was called Veridia. Anya's blood ran cold. Veridia. The name was a lightning bolt, a searing brand on her memory. It was prescribed as an advanced fertility treatment. Isabel whispered, her eyes locked on Anya's. For couples who had tried everything else, it was hailed as a miracle drug. Anya's hand, the one not pressed against her stomach, flew to her mouth. No, it couldn't be. The room began to spin. The minimalist grey walls seemed to close in on her. She and Julian had struggled to conceive. For 2 years they had been through a heart-breaking cycle of hope and disappointment. Doctors had found no specific issue, just unexplained infertility. Then a year ago, a new specialist, a top doctor recommended by Julian himself, had suggested a new cutting-edge treatment. A miracle drug from Europe, he had called it. Its name was Viridia. Anya stared at Julian, at the man she had married, the man whose child she was carrying. The man who had looked on with what she thought was shared joy when the pregnancy test finally came back positive. But it hadn't been joy. It had been the culmination of a monstrous plan. The side effects, Anya could barely form the words. Her throat was tight with terror. What were the side effects? Julian finally broke. A guttural, animalistic sob tore from his chest. Anya, I'm sorry. I can fix it. We have money. The best doctors. Isabel gave the final brutal answer, her voice devoid of all emotion, a flat line of horror. It worked. The drug allowed women to conceive. That part was true. But the hidden data from the original trials showed that in nearly 80% of cases, the fetus would develop a rare and fatal neurological disorder. Most didn't survive the 3rd trimester. Those who were born didn't live past their 1st year. The world went silent. The agents, the handcuffs, the penthouse, it all dissolved into an indistinct blur. The only thing that was real was the life kicking inside her. A life she had craved, a life she had celebrated, a life that had been conceived through a monstrous lie, a poison given to her by the man she loved. This was the dark secret. The divorce wasn't about protecting his money. It was about severing all ties before his child was born with the fatal condition he himself had knowingly unleashed upon the world. He wasn't trying to disown a wife. He was trying to outrun a death sentence. He was trying to erase the ultimate evidence of his crime, his own dying child. Anya looked at her husband, the father of her child, the architect of her destruction. He was no longer a man. He was a void. A black hole of greed and ambition that had consumed everything, including the life of his own unborn baby. The strength drained from her legs. The room tilted violently, the glittering view of Central Park spinning into a nauseating vortex. As her knees buckled and the world faded to black, the last thing she heard was the distant hollow sound of her own scream. Anya awoke to a world bleached of all color. The first sensation was not sight, but smell. A sharp, aggressive scent of antiseptic that scoured her nostrils and bore no resemblance to the curated peony and old money fragrance of her former life. The second was sound, the soft, insistent, and terrifyingly rhythmic beep of a machine somewhere to her left. For a fleeting, merciful moment, she was adrift in a sea of disorientation, the horrors of the previous evening feeling like the suffocating remnants of a fever dream. Had it been real? The cold words, the crimson dress, the click of handcuffs. Then with the force of a physical impact, the memories crashed back in. Viridia. The name detonated in her mind a single word that contained a universe of betrayal. It was the name of the drug. The poison, the monstrous lie she had welcomed into her body. A raw, guttural sob tore itself from her throat, and her hand, trembling uncontrollably, flew to her stomach. The gentle, reassuring swell was still there, a fragile vessel in a venomous sea. Was her baby the one pure thing she had left already a ghost? Easy now, Mrs. Croft. Take a deep breath. A calm, steady voice pierced through the fog of her panic. A woman in navy blue scrubs her face, a welcome portrait of professional kindness, was adjusting the IV drip in Anya's arm. You fainted. We brought you straight to Lenox Hill Hospital. We've been monitoring you and the baby. The baby, Anya's voice was a ragged whisper, a thread of sound in the cavernous silence of her fear. She couldn't bring herself to ask the real question, the one that clawed at the inside of her skull. Is it dying? The nurse's eyes softened with understanding. The baby is fine, she said, her words deliberate and clear. A little stressed when you were brought in, but the heartbeat is strong and steady now. Your own heart rate is elevated, which is understandable. You've had a severe shock. The baby is strong. 4 simple words. They were not a cure, not a promise, but they were a lifeline. In the raging flood of her shattered reality, Anya clung to them as if they were the last solid ground on earth. Her baby was a fighter. It was already more than its father had ever been. I need to see a doctor, Anya managed, pushing herself up slightly. The effort made the room spin. A specialist, not just an OB, a geneticist, someone who understands. I need to know everything. Her voice broke on the last word. She needed to know the shape of the monster she was facing. We've already paged the head of our maternal fetal medicine department, Dr. Eleanor Ramirez. The nurse reassured her, fluffing a thin pillow behind her head. She's the best. She'll be here to speak with you shortly. For now, just try to breathe. Rest was an impossible luxury. Her mind was a torture chamber, replaying Julian's face, twisting in panic, the cold finality of the FBI agent's voice, and Isabel's horrified confession over and over. The entire architecture of her life, a magnificent structure she had once admired, had been revealed as a criminal enterprise, a house of cards built on stolen dreams. And the final, most intimate, most unspeakable betrayal was swimming in her very womb, conceived from a miracle that was in truth a time bomb. As the nurse left to give her a moment, another figure appeared hesitantly in the doorway. It was Isabel. She had shed the blood-red dress, the armor of Julian's mistress, and now wore a simple, anonymous pair of jeans and a grey sweater. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the faint purple smudges of exhaustion beneath her eyes. The emerald fire in her irises had been banked, leaving a weary, sorrowful glow. Anya's body tensed. A primal part of her wanted to scream at this woman, the beautiful harbinger of her apocalypse. But the anger felt distant, a secondary emotion, muted by the all-consuming terror of Julian's ultimate sin. Isabel wasn't the enemy. She was just another piece of scorched debris in the blast radius of Julian Croft. "What do you want?" Anya asked, her voice raspy, devoid of accusation, but heavy with exhaustion. I came to see if you were all right," Isabel said, her voice barely a whisper. She hovered by the door, a respectful distance away, as if acknowledging she was trespassing on sacred ground of grief. "And to tell you, I told them everything." Anya remained silent, watching her. "The agents at the penthouse," Isabel clarified, twisting a loose thread on her sweater. "After they took you, I stayed for hours. I told them about Viridia, about the BioVance data. About Julian's back door into Gentech. I gave them the offshore account numbers he'd bragged about, the server locations he thought were hidden. Everything I knew. My brother is working with them too. He's turning over every record from his firm. He's terrified, but he wants to make it right. Why Anya's question was genuine, a flicker of curiosity in the darkness. Why not just disappear? He would have given you money to run. Isabel finally met her gaze, and Anya saw the profound depth of her self-loathing. Because he was going to let my brother, my family, take the fall for a crime he masterminded. That was the first crack in the fantasy. But the moment I found out about Viridia, the real truth of it, I looked at him, Julian, the man I thought I loved, and I saw a void. It wasn't just greed, Anya. What kind of person knowingly condemns unborn children for profit? It was a level of evil I couldn't comprehend. Her eyes flickered to Anya's stomach. When he told me he was divorcing you, I knew why. He was running from the evidence, from his own child. And I knew you were pregnant, but I didn't know about the drug. Not until my brother's lawyer uncovered the connection. The thought of you, going through the rest of your pregnancy celebrating only to face that. She shook her head, a tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't let you be the last one to know the truth. It was the only thing I could do to claw back a single shred of my own soul. In that moment, Anya saw past the affair, past the label of mistress. She saw another woman who had been utterly conned, another life consumed by Julian's insatiable ego. They were bound by a strange, twisted sisterhood forged in the fires of his spectacular destruction. They've frozen everything. Isabel added her voice, flat and emotionless. Every asset. The penthouse is a federal crime scene. The accounts are locked. The cars, the art, the watches, it's all gone. Evidence in the largest fraud case in a decade. His lawyers are saying the evidence is insurmountable. He'll never see the outside of a prison cell again. Good, a cold, hard part of Anya thought. Let him rot. But the satisfaction was hollow, a fleeting warmth in an Arctic landscape of pain. Julian's imprisonment couldn't reverse time, couldn't purify the poison. The door opened again, and a woman with intelligent, compassionate eyes and an air of calm authority entered the room. Mrs. Croft. I'm Dr. Ramirez. With a final lingering look of profound regret, Isabel quietly slipped out of the room, leaving Anya to face her new reality. The next hour was a clinical, terrifying blur of medical terminology, consent forms, and agonizing questions. Dr. Ramirez was a miracle of empathy and professionalism. She explained the process for an advanced diagnostic amniocentesis, carefully and patiently outlining the procedure, the risks, and the stark reality of the potential results. She didn't offer false hope, only facts. And for that, Anya was grateful. I have to know, Dr. Anya pleaded, her composure finally crumbling under the clinical weight of it all. Whatever it is, I have to know what I'm facing. We will get you answers, Doctor. Ramirez promised, her hand briefly resting on Anya's arm. The simple human touch was grounding. As quickly and as safely as we possibly can. The days that followed were a unique form of purgatory. Anya remained in the hospital, a voluntary prisoner in a sterile white room, while the world outside feasted on the carcass of her old life. The news of Julian's arrest had gone supernova. Wall Street Wunderkind, or Ponzi King, screamed the cable news chyrons. His smug, handsome face was plastered everywhere the poster boy for catastrophic hubris. The stories detailed the SPAC's fraud in lurid detail, but the darkest secret, the corporate evil of Viridia, remained a tightly sealed component of the federal case, a horror not yet fit for public consumption. Anya refused all visitors, save for her parents, who flew in immediately, their faces etched with a pain that mirrored her own. She hired a team of lawyers, not to fight for a share of Julian's blood money, but to meticulously expunge him from her life. To dissolve the marriage, to legally and financially firewall her child from the toxic Croft name and its indelible legacy of shame. She existed in a state of suspended animation, the week-long wait for the test results stretching into an eternity. She didn't sleep, she merely drifted in and out of consciousness. In her waking hours, she would stare out the window at the city, a city that now seemed alien to her. Every pregnant woman she saw, every baby in a stroller was a stab to the heart. She was suspended between a life that was over and a future that was too terrifying to contemplate. Finally, the day came. Dr. Ramirez entered her room alone, closing the door softly behind her. She held a file, and her expression was calm, professional, and utterly unreadable. Anya's heart began to pound, a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs. This was it, the precipice. She gripped her own hands over her belly, a protective gesture that felt painfully inadequate. Dr. Ramirez sat in the chair beside the bed, opened the file but didn't look at it. She looked directly at Anya. "We have the results from the full genomic sequencing panel," she said, her voice even. Anya held her breath, bracing for the impact, for the words that would shatter the final fragments of her world. Dr. Ramirez took a slow, deliberate breath. "Anya, your baby is perfectly healthy." The words didn't register. They were a language she had forgotten how to speak. Anya just stared at her, her mind a blank slate of incomprehension. "What, no? That's not possible. Viridia, the neurological degradation." I know, the doctor said gently, her professional calm finally breaking into a warm, reassuring smile. "We read the federal case files your lawyers managed to get unsealed for us. We knew the exact rare genetic markers we were looking for, and they are not there. We ran the test twice to be certain. He is completely, unequivocally unaffected. He." Her mind snagged on the word. "He. You're having a son." Anya Dr. Ramirez confirmed, her eyes shining. "A healthy baby boy." The dam broke. A sound, a wail that was equal parts grief and joy, tore from deep inside her. It was the sound of a week of terror, of months of unknowing, of a lifetime of betrayal, being washed away by a single miraculous wave of relief. The tears came, then hot and cleansing, pouring down her face as she finally truly let go. But how she sobbed, her body shaking. Isabel said, 80%. 80% is not 100%, the doctor said, softly, her voice thick with emotion. It means 20%, 1 in 5 were spared. It's a game of Russian roulette, played with the most precious stakes imaginable. It's a monstrous, unforgivable gamble. But Anya, you and your son, you won. She won. It wasn't a victory over Julian. It was a victory over fate, over poison, over the darkness that had tried to claim her future. Anya checked out of the hospital the next morning. The world looked different, the colors more vibrant, the air cleaner. The Julian Croft penthouse on Park Avenue was sealed a monument to a dead life. She walked away from it without a backward glance. With a small, life-saving loan from her parents, she found a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn's Park Slope. It was a world away from the silent, sterile grandeur she had known. From her window, she saw not a curated park, but a living one. She could hear the joyful shrieks of children playing the friendly bark of dogs, the distant, reassuring rumble of the F-train. It was the chaotic, beautiful symphony of real life. She spent the final peaceful months of her pregnancy rebuilding. She bought a second-hand crib and painted the nursery a cheerful, sunny yellow. She reconnected with her old circle of wonderfully messy, artistic friends who enveloped her in a cocoon of unconditional love and support, never once mentioning her notorious past. They brought her soup, helped her assemble furniture, and made her laugh, truly laugh for the first time in years. 3 months later, Leo Alexander was born, weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces. He was loud, demanding, and utterly perfect. He had her eyes and a stubborn tuft of dark hair. Holding him for the first time, skin to skin, feeling his tiny, fragile fingers instinctively curl around hers. Anya felt a love so vast and powerful it rearranged her entire universe. This was real wealth. This was a legacy. One rainy afternoon as a 2-week-old, Leo slept soundly on her chest. A news alert popped up on her phone. Julian Croft sentenced. She read that faced with an avalanche of evidence and Isabel's unshakable testimony, he had accepted a plea bargain to avoid having the full horrific details of the Viridia scandal made public in a trial. He was sentenced to 150 years in a federal supermax facility with no possibility of parole. Anya looked down at her sleeping son, his chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. She felt no hatred for Julian, no desire for revenge. She felt nothing at all. He was a ghost, the antagonist of a story that was already over. Her story and Leo's was just beginning. Her life was no longer defined by the man she had lost, but by the son she had almost lost and had miraculously gained. She was not the millionaire's disgraced wife. She was Leo's mother, and in the quiet, sun-drenched world of her small Brooklyn apartment, she was the richest woman in the world. Anya's story is a harrowing journey from a gilded cage to true freedom. It's a reminder that wealth can be a mask for unimaginable darkness, and that true strength isn't found in penthouses or designer clothes, but in the fierce, unyielding power of a mother's love. She lost a life of luxury, but gained a life of purpose, proving that even after the most devastating betrayals, we have the power to rise from the ashes and build a new world for ourselves and for our children. Her story isn't just about the downfall of a wicked man, but the rise of an unbreakable woman. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of drama, resilience, and ultimate justice. Let us know in the comments what you think of Anya's incredible journey.